Hello, let's knit a piece of candy. To get started, we will need some big fluffy yarn in the super bulky size number 6. I'm going to use Woolies Thick and Quick. You will also need some very sharp scissors, a measuring tape, a darning needle with a really big eye, a large eye darning needle, so that it will work with the big fluffy yarn, and a stitch marker to help you keep track of your rounds or rows, because this will be knitted in the round in a circle. This pattern starts with a long tail cast on, and for that we will need to find the end of our yarn. I like to work from the center of the yarn so it pulls a little more smoothly, but it's a little bit trickier to find that end. Just kind of start digging around in the center until you find the end of that yarn. And sometimes the outside tail is tucked in. That can tangle you up a little bit, so move that and tuck it under the label. And then go back to searching for that middle end. Now, sometimes it's not easy and you may cause a little bit of a mess with your yarn in the middle, but when you start knitting, all of that will go into your project anyway, so it doesn't matter that much. Oops. So we pulled out a big bit, but now I can see where the end is, right there. Find that, and to start knitting, we'll just use that end. We're going to pull a long tail. We're going to measure a long tail coming out of this ball of yarn, or our little pile. But we will need to cast on 32 stitches for this knitting pattern. So what we'll do is measure about 32 inches twice. That would be 64 total inches of yarn, pulling that away from our ball of yarn. So we'll go ahead and get our measuring tape out and find 32 inches. And then we will measure that 32 inches once. Hold the yarn at that spot and measure another 32 inches. Twice. And here is where we will start to make loops that we can put on our knitting needles and start our knitting project. So at that 32-inch point, we are going to make what's called a slip knot. Let me show you how to make that. We'll hold the yarn right at the 32-inch point, and we'll wrap around our hand, bringing one side under the yarn, pulling up and through, and then we will start tightening that loop onto our finger. Get it to be about the same size as your knitting needles, but it doesn't need to be perfect. And slip it on one end of your knitting needle. You'll see I'm holding the knitting needle in my right hand with the tip pointing towards the left, and then gently tighten that knot onto the knitting needle. Not so tight that it won't move around, but just so it goes all the way around the needle. Now you've done a slip knot. Oh, if it comes off, put it right back on that needle. Now you've done that slip knot, we can go ahead and start casting on our stitches. That slip knot will count as our first cast on stitch. We'll need to cast on 31 more stitches to get our total of 32. We'll keep that knitting needle with our slip knot in the right hand pointing towards the left, and spread that yarn out a little bit so the tail part, or the end of the yarn, your long tail, is not going to get tangled up with the part that's coming from the ball, or if you made a little mess, the mess that's coming from the ball. Either way, it will work up into a pretty knit piece, don't worry. But spread those two ends aside so that you have a little V, a little tent shape going underneath your knitting needle. You'll take your left hand and pinch your thumb and your pointer finger together. Put your 3 fingers out and make a little bit of an OK sign. You'll go underneath the 2 strands of yarn that are coming down from your knitting needle. And then you're going to want to grab the yarn tail with these 3 fingers. And then grab the second yarn tail with the same 3 fingers. You'll rotate your hands, making a little bit of a wrapped V around your fingers. Next, we'll go ahead and use our knitting needle to start making more loops that go on our cast on. So seeing as we already have our slip knot, that counts as our first stitch. We'll do 31 more. To do 1 loop, we'll go under 1, down by our thumb, with that needle tip under, and then we'll take it over 2 strands of yarn. So 1, 2, over, grab the yarn, the second strand of yarn, and bring it through, pull it through, and slip it off of your thumb and onto the knitting needle. Gently tighten it on there, but not too tight, just as tight as the first stitch was. Now you have 2 cast on stitches. We'll do the rest of the stitches in the same way with this long tail cast on. So again, put your hand under the yarn, grab the tails of the yarn with your last 3 fingers, and rotate your hand. Now you go with the needle under 1 strand of yarn by your thumb, over 2, bring it around and pull it through, let it off your thumb and gently tighten it onto that knitting needle with the other cast on stitches. And now you've cast on 3 stitches. We'll do the same thing for all the rest. So the needle tip goes under 1, over 2, grab the top strand and pull it through. Gently tighten it onto your needle and slide it over so you have room to make the next stitch. We have 4, we'll do it again. Under 1, over 2, grab the top one and pull it through. And that's 5. Under 1, over 2, grab the top one, pull it through. 6. Under 1, over 2, grab the top, pull it through. 7. Under 1, over 2, grab the top, pull it through. There's 8. You do them all the same way, so I'm going to go a little bit faster just to get to 32. So this will be 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, And my tail isn't quite as long as I wanted it to be. I must have pulled the string really tight when I was measuring. We can still get 32 out of this and be fine. And 32. Be careful not to let the little tail pull through if you have a tiny tail like that. Or you can just start your cast on over. But now we have 32 stitches on our knitting needles. And a tail, and we will make a circular knit, so we need to join the ends of the yarn next. I'll show you how to do that. We are going to do what they call knitting in the round, and we will need to join the ends of the round. That's what our pattern tells us to do next. What that means is we need to make this side of the knitting that we just cast on meet up with the other end of the knitting where we started with our slip knot. To do that, instead of turning our work, we'll slide our stitches toward the tip of the needle and work straight into the other end of the knitting. Now check and make sure you haven't twisted your stitches because your end won't look right. So if you joined it all twisted up, your hat bottom would be, the bottom of your work would be all twisted up as well. So make sure it's not twisted before you join your stitches. When it's not twisted, you'll have a flat, straight edge all in line with itself. Next, we'll grab our stitch marker. I have a little plastic circle for this, and we just slip it onto the knitting needle that we just finished casting our stitches onto. Right onto the tip of that. And then we will go ahead and pick up the other end of the knitting needle with the left hand and make sure it points towards the right. So the needle tips are both pointing at each other. We'll pick up our yarn with our left hand to make a knit stitch so that we can connect the two ends with just a knit stitch. And then we'll be able to work around and around in a circle, and eventually it will make a really nice tube of fabric. So to pick up the yarn, put it between your fingers, draping it over your pointer finger and under your last three fingers. Turn your hand and take a hold of the left hand knitting needle with your back three fingers and your thumb. Keep your pointer finger out so that you can move it around and guide this piece of yarn as you start knitting. We'll make a knit stitch by poking into the front of the next stitch on the left needle, the first stitch. Poke from the front to the back and grab the yarn over the top and pull it through that very first stitch and pull it off onto the right hand needle. Now you see we have joined our round, which means that there's a connection here between one side of the cast on and the other side of the cast on, and you'll be able to work in a circle now. The stitch marker will show you the beginning and the end of your row. You'll know the stitch marker is between the last stitch and the first stitch of every row or round. So we'll go ahead and work the rest of this pattern, which tells us to knit 47 rows. Every single stitch will be a knit stitch, and that'll measure about 17 inches. We'll use almost this whole ball of yarn. But every stitch will be a knit stitch, so as a reminder, we poke through the front, grab the yarn over the top from the back, and pull it through the stitch, off and onto the right hand needle. If you have a little yarn tail like that, tug it just to make sure it doesn't get unraveled. We'll make all of our knit stitches in the same way, poking through the front, grabbing the yarn and pulling it through and off onto the right hand needle, all the way around for 17 inches, and that will make us a long tube of yarn. Now that I've shown you the basics, I'll go just a little bit faster because, like I said, every single stitch all the way until our bind off row round will be a knit stitch, just in the same exact way. I'm doing a poke through the front, grab over the top, pull through and off onto the right hand needle, all the way around. I'll do this in a fast forward high speed motion for you and meet you back when it is time to bind off and finish out the project. When you do come to the end of a round or row, you will reach this stitch marker. That means I have knit all 32 stitches in the row in our pattern. This last one, because I made my yarn tail just a little bit too short, usually they're about 8 or 10 inches, but this will still work. I'm going to pull it just to make sure I don't lose it. And then I'll slip my stitch marker from needle to needle and just continue knitting. This will be the third row of our knitting pattern. But again, every single stitch will be knitted. You can count your rows if you like, or at the end, just come in and measure and make sure it's about the correct size. And I will see you when it's time to bind off. Okay, now that I've come to the end of one of my rounds or rows, and I've used up most of this ball of yarn, you see it's almost gone. It's time to check and measure and see if I've gotten to 17 inches yet. Since we're at the stopping point between rows, we can set the stitch marker aside just for now. Let's do some measuring. Looks like we need to knit just a little bit more. Yep, just a few more inches. So we'll keep going and bind off when we hit that 17 inches. We've come to that stitch marker again, and I've knit quite a few more rounds, and we've used up a little bit more yarn, so let's check the measurement again, knowing that we need to get to 17 inches. Let's see. Well, it looks like we've gotten to 16, so almost there. That should be 17 inches, but let's just double check. Yes, it is 17 inches. There we go. Now I can show you how to bind this off, which means take it off the knitting needles. To take these stitches off the needles, we'll bind off in the round, which is really just the same method as binding off on a flat piece, like when you made a coaster, or if you're going to make a scarf, or even a placemat. So here's where our stitch marker was. We can leave that on the needle, or we can set it aside. It's fine to just leave it on your knitting needle. And when we go to bind off, we'll pick up our yarn just as before, like we're going to keep knitting around and around, but we're only going to knit 2 stitches to start, and then we'll work on binding off. So you'll knit 1 and 2 stitches, and you'll see that on your right hand needle now there are 2 stitches on this part after your stitch marker. We're going to take the first stitch and we're going to lift it up and over the second stitch on this right hand needle. We'll use the left hand needle to help us do that. So you'll take the tip of the needle and insert it from the front through the stitch lifting it up, scooting your stitches over so you can get to the end of the needle, and then we're going to lift this first stitch up and over the second stitch, being very careful not to drop it off your needles. Pull that through and let it go onto your right hand needle. You'll see now there's only one stitch left before the stitch marker. After the stitch marker. Next, we'll knit one more stitch off that left needle onto the right, and now there'll be 2 stitches on the right hand needle again on the other side of that stitch marker. Again, we're going to lift the first stitch up with our left hand needle and over the second stitch on the right hand needle, bringing that second stitch through and lifting it off onto the right hand needle. We'll do that all the way around, always having only 2 stitches here on this left side of the stitch marker. So we'll knit one more to get 2 stitches onto the right hand needle. Then we'll lift the second stitch up over the first stitch and slide that over to the right hand needle, having 1 stitch there again. We'll do that again. Knit 1, lift the first stitch over the second, and slide it over. We do that all the way around until we come back to the stitch marker. So knit 1, lift up and over, pull that through and over to the right hand needle. Knit 1 more, lift it up and over, and slide it off. Knit 1, lift the first stitch up over the second one, slide it off, knit again, all the way around. Lift up and over, pull that through. You'll see our gap is growing wider between our stitch marker and this 1 stitch we have on the right hand needle, and it's starting to come off the needles in a nice smooth little pattern. So we keep going the same way. Knit 1, so there's 2 on the right hand needle, lift up and over, careful not to drop it, pull it through, leaving 1 on that right hand needle. Slide your stitches around as you work so they're always able to reach the tip of the needle. We're going to knit 1, lift that first stitch on the right needle up over the second, slide it off, knit 1, lift the first stitch over the second, and slide it off. Knit 1, lift the first stitch over the second, knit 1, lift the first stitch over the second. We'll just keep doing that all the way around, and we'll come to the stitch marker, but always make sure that there are only 2 stitches on the right hand needle at the most at any time when you're doing your bind off. And this will help you take all your stitches off the needle. You just keep doing the same thing. Knitting 1, lift the first over the second, slide it off, knit 1, lift the first over the second, slide it off, knit 1, lift the first over the second, and slide it off. We'll just keep on going around and around the same way. And when we get to the end, all of those stitches will have come off the knitting needles. Let me speed it up just a little bit because I think you're getting the hang of it. Now we're coming to the end of the last stitches on our left-hand needle. You can see our needles are almost free. Our stitch marker's kind of floating around. So again, we're going to knit one, lift the first over the second, knit one more. That's our last stitch off of our left-hand needle. Lift that first stitch on the right hand over the second stitch and slide that off. The left-hand needle is free of stitches. You can let that go. Don't let this off of the needle just yet. We need to bring in our scissors now and clip off the yarn. We're going to leave a tail of yarn about 8 or 10 inches long, not short like our little accidental tail at the beginning here. About 8 or 10 inches will help you to make that tail go into the knitting. We call it weaving in our ends. So let's get our ruler. We'll go with about 10 inches. Get our scissors and clip it off there. Now, instead of letting the stitch come off the needle, we're going to take our needle, we're going to pull up and away from the knitting, bringing that with us. Bring the loop with the knitting needle. You see this tail starting to slide through. So bring that out, out, out until the tail comes completely out of your knitting. There it goes. So it was like that. And now you're free. And if you look at, your stitch marker can come off that circular needle, and both of those can be put away, because now all we have left to do is deal with what we called these yarn tails or loose ends, the extra string that's left over here. But when you pull that through, you can see that it tightens on there and anchors it in, so none of your knitting stitches are going to come apart. It holds it all together at the end there. Now all we have left to do is weave in these loose ends, and we'll do that now. To get these ends into our knitting project and not hanging around, we will need what's called a darning needle. We've got a large eye on this darning needle. This one's made of plastic, and a blunt tip. That means it's not very sharp. So what we'll do is we'll take this loose end. This one's about the right length that we can work with it, and we're going to tie it in, sew it in first, and then tie a tiny little knot to hide that inside of the knitting pattern. So first we take this end of our yarn and we're going to thread it onto our darning needle right through the eye. Put the yarn right through that little hole that's called the eye. Pull it through just a little ways so that it's not going to come off. Next we'll pick up the knitting and we're going to try to match up the pattern with whatever end we're using. We'll want to sort of match it up so that it looks nice and you're not just kind of weaving it in some weird place. Line it up and try to make the edges look pretty. So we'll go through here, and I'm going to take my needle and sew it right through a couple of these loops just so that we can get it away from the edge and we can tie a tiny little knot that will hide. So I'm going to go right through here, down, sew it through, which means just pull that yarn through, but don't let it come off of that needle. Don't pull it too tight or it will mess up your pattern a little bit. It'll look silly. Just nice and gentle and try to make it match. And then I want to do one more right down through here. And we're going to pull that right through. Not too tight again, just gentle. This doesn't have to be perfect because it will be just rolled up. You won't even see it when you're finished here with the edge of your little candy. So now we're going to take the yarn off the darning needle just for a moment. We're going to split this yarn in half. Do you see, if you look close at the yarn, there are two pieces twisted together. We're going to untwist it just a little bit, take the tip of your darning needle and put it between the two pieces. Gently move it back and forth a little bit, just to kind of ease those two pieces apart. And don't pull too hard or they can rip the yarn. Gently pull them apart. And once you have them apart, lay them out in opposite directions. Pick one and put it back on this darning needle in the same way we did before. Take the end of the yarn and put it right through the eye of the needle. And then we'll go back and look at where we are in our knitting. And we're going to pick a stitch that we're going to anchor it around to, make it hold on tight to that stitch. So do you see where we've gone and wrapped right around this stitch here? We're going to go around it again with the yarn so that we come right back up through next to our other side. So sew that through just like that. And don't pull too tight, nice and gentle. And you can take that off of the needle now and set that aside for later. We're going to take that yarn and lay it out in opposite directions. Now that it's anchored onto a stitch, we're going to tie two tiny little knots that will hold it in place. So you're going to want to pick up either side of this yarn with opposite hands. So I'm going to take my right hand and pick up the left string. I'm going to take my left hand and pick up the right string, and we'll cross them. This time we're going to take the right string in front of the left, bring it up and around and through towards the front and down to the surface of your knitting. Now let go of those strands. Don't pull it too tight, because if you pull very tight on this yarn, it will just break apart and you don't want to do that. So don't pull too hard, be very gentle. Now we're going to switch hands. So again, I'm going to use my right hand on the left hand string, my left hand on the right hand string, and we'll cross those strings in the exact same way we did before. We'll bring it around and through and tie a knot down to the surface of the knitting and pull tight, tight, tight this time. Not too far out on the ends of the yarn because it will break, but close to the knot. Tight, 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 tight. And now we'll take our scissors and we'll cut these two ends off. So get some scissors and go find where the knot starts and clip off each side as close to the knot as you can, but don't clip the knot or the knitting that you just did. So clip, and that can go away. The other side just the same way. Clip. And that can go away as well. Now we give our end just a little gentle pull, just to make sure it's not going to come undone, and it didn't, so that's good. Now we're done with that side, and it will roll up, curl up all on its own if you just sort of fold it a little bit. And that's one side of our piece of candy. Now let's do the other side that has a loose end also. Now remember, I accidentally did that end a little bit too short, so let me show you what to do if you do end up doing that. You can always start your cast on over at the beginning of the project, but if you choose not to, this is what you'll need to do. So because it's too short, it won't go on this darning needle and sew in. Let me show you. So I can thread it through the eye, just like that, just like we did before. But if I go to sew it, it's not going to work very well. It's going to keep falling off. So that's why we want it to be a little bit longer at the start of things, even though this doesn't seem like it would be a problem. But we can solve it by doing just a little bit of tucking in here. We'll take that yarn, and as you see, we have another little hole here. Kind of try to follow the pattern like we did just before on the other yarn tail. I'm just going to tuck it in with my hand instead of using that darning needle. Just poke it through. And find one on the other side that we can go and poke it through again. Poke it through all the way. And that's about as far as we can go with that little short end, but that's okay, that's about all we need. Let's split that yarn in half like we did with the other side. So you don't even need the darning needle for that, you can put that aside with this little short tail. We split it in half. We'll take it with our hand. Since this big yarn has big holes, we can do this. If you're using smaller yarn, you really do need to make sure you have a longer tail or you're gonna have trouble with this part. But we need to take the one end and wrap it around the stitch so it comes right out next to the other tail, and it will anchor it onto that stitch when we tie our little knot, and it won't slip away. So wrap around through to one side, and then we're going to make sure it tucks right back in on the other side next to this tail that's coming out already. Pull it all the way through. It's a little tricky. There we go. Now we want to lay those two tails out in opposite directions. Don't pull too tight, but just gently lay them out in opposite directions. We'll tie our little knot the same way. Opposite hands, opposite strands. So, then cross them and tuck it through and make a little knot and pull it down gently to the surface, not too tight here, just gently to the surface. We'll lay those ends out again, let go of them, and switch hands. So we're going to grab them opposite hands, opposite sides, cross them in the same exact way as before, bring it around and through, tuck it in through the hole, and tie it tight, tight, tight this time, tight as you can. And then we'll clip off the ends of that yarn, and we will be ready to stuff our little pillow. So again, we clip it right next to the knot, but we don't clip the knitting. Clip and clip, and then stretch it a little bit, and it'll start to roll up. Roll that end just the same, and now we will get ready to stuff that toy pillow because it is almost finished. You've done all the knitting part. Now we'll just fill it up and turn it into a little toy or a pillow. To stuff this little candy, we will need just the rest of the yarn that we have left from making the main body of the candy and some kind of stuffing. I have this polyfill plush stuffing, fiber-filled stuffing. That'll go in the middle of our knitting project here. We will tie up the loose end, or tie up the ends here, the open ends of the candy, with a piece of string left over from our project, stuffing the middle with that stuffing, and then tying the other end. So let's get started. First, we'll need a couple of pieces of yarn cut off of here. We'll use about 17 inches of yarn, and if you remember, our knitting piece was 17 inches long, so we'll just measure it against our knitting piece. It doesn't have to be exact. So there's one piece. Get the scissors here, clip off a bit of yarn, and we need two pieces because we have two ends to close up. Make them the same length. Flip. And now we can start closing up those ends. We will measure about 4 inches from the edge of our work to start closing the edge, the first edge that will hold in the stuffing. So we need to uncurl it just a little bit so we can measure. We need to do 4 inches from the edge and just get a general idea of where that is. Keep your finger in that place while you pick up one of the pieces of yarn. Put it near you so you're ready to use it when you need it. And then we're going to go ahead and scrunch this end up right about where that 4-inch mark was. So grab both edges and sort of scrunch. Now don't tie it yet. Go check and make sure it's nice and round on the edge where you scrunched. keeping it about 4 inches from the edge of that knitting piece. Round it out nice and smooth so when you tie the little string around it, it will be even. Okay, now we'll take this string and lay it flat underneath and try to put it right about where that 4-inch mark was. Well, let go of the edge here and quickly, while you try to hold it in place, grab the other side of the yarn, wrap them both up towards the top, cross them and make just a regular knot here. Tuck it under and pull it through. And pull both ends as tight as you can without breaking that string. See how it's starting to pucker up like a candy? Okay, now let's flip that work over, roll it over, bring the yarn with you, and now we can tie another knot on the other side. So we're going to cross it, bring one end under and through, and tie that knot as tight, tight, tight as you can. We'll do that one more time. Roll it over, cross those yarn ends, bring it under and through, and pull it as tight as you can. Now we're going to make a second knot and hold that in place. So drop those ends carefully, quickly change sides, opposite hands and opposite sides, cross those 2 strands of yarn, tuck it under and through, and pull that tight again. Pull that as tightly as you can to make sure it's in place. And then we'll do one more knot on the other side, turn it around. Do the same kind of double knot we just did. So cross those strands, lay them across, and then we're going to make a tuck it under their knot, tuck, pull through, pull tight, 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 tight as you can. And then drop them and grab opposite hands, opposite strands, cross them, and make one more knot. Go as tight, tight, tight as you can on this one. Oh, pull hard, okay? Now we'll get our scissors and clip that yarn off near the knot. Right there. Make sure you don't clip the knot or the yarn or the knitting project here, but that little tail off the project. Okay, give it a little tug to make sure it doesn't come undone. If it comes undone, don't worry, try again. Probably just means you didn't tie your knot quite tightly enough. It's okay, try again. But now we've got the candy end ready on this side. The next thing we'll do is add some of that stuffing I showed you a second ago and make the middle of the candy so that it's nice and fluffy. Grab a few big handfuls. There you go, let me show you what I'm doing here. So when you pull the stuffing out of the bag, it gets all fluffy like that. You take it to the open end of our little candy and stuff it inside. And try to make it nice and smooth and round, not lumpy if you can help it. And then the other end you want to close and see if you got enough stuffing. I don't think that's quite enough. I think that belly of the candy is just a little too small. So let me get another handful of about the same size. Another big handful, and we'll put it in the same way. Just kind of stuff it in that open end, making sure it's nice and fluffy and round, not lumpy. So I want this candy to be round. There we go. Then on the outside, kind of fluff it. And again, we're going to double check and see if that's about the size we want our candy to be. I think that's much closer. So we'll get our ruler, our measuring tape, and check that it's about 4 inches from the edge of our knitting. There's 4 inches from the edge is about here, and that looks about right. So mark that spot with your finger while you pick up that other strand of yarn we clipped off earlier, and we'll do the same thing as we did on the other side. Tuck that strand, marking our place up and under right about where that 4-inch mark was, and this time make sure all that stuffing is in behind where it's going to be closed so it's not hanging out, and it'll fluff back up in a little while after we finish tying that knot. So pinch it closed here, just the same as before, right at about that 4-inch mark. Make sure before you wrap that string around it that it's smooth and even in the way you want it to look. Then we take that string, we bring it up and around, this one too. We're going to tie a knot, tuck it under, and let go. Tuck it under, pull it through, and tie that knot tight, tight, tight. Okay. And we'll roll it again like we did on the other side. Roll it over, bring in the yarn with you. Cross that yarn, and make another knot in that piece of string. Right there. Tuck it under, pull it through, and tight as you can. Tight, 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 tight. All right, roll it over again. Okay, cross it, make a knot by tucking it under, pulling it through, tight, tight, tight. This time we're going to let go of those 2 ends of yarn and make another knot by grabbing opposite sides of the yarn with opposite hands. Cross your hands, cross the yarn, tuck it under and through, and pull it out, pull it tight, 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 tight. And then we're going to roll it over one more time and make one more knot if you can. We're getting close to the end here. So tuck it under and through. Tight, tight, tight. And if this string's just too close for you, that's okay. Just tie one more knot on the other side and clip it off. And then let go of those strands. Switch hands and cross those. Bring one through that little hole, and pull that tight, as tightly as possible. Okay, now we'll get the scissors and clip that off, and we will be all done with this little candy. So right next to the knot, but don't clip your project or the knot itself. Okay. I got it all. There's a little loose piece. There we go. Got it all. Okay. Now you just kind of squish it into the shape you want it to be. Make sure those edges curl the way you want them to. And you have a little piece of candy that you have knit. You can use it as a toy or a decoration. It's a cute little pillow. But I hope that you had fun making it. I hope you learned something, and I hope you come back to learn more knitting things at pearlsandpixels.com, where you can find this pattern and lots of other free patterns too. Happy knitting!